welcome to the Popcorn Junkies. Welcome, lads. How are you?
Good.
If you haven't, subscribe, because we give you honest, forthright, candid reviews of movies, streaming shows, trailers, you name it. We aren't going to be bought out unless you offer us a lot of money. Okay, this is a review of The Last Showgirl. Most notable for the fact that this is the new movie starring Pamela Anderson herself. It's not about her, like the Pam and Tommy series. It stars her. And it's directed by Gia Coppola, who's part of the Coppola family. She's, I think, Francis Ford Coppola's granddaughter. And there's been a lot of excitement about this. There's a lot of chatter about it being awards possibilities. Could she be up for an Oscar? It's the rebirth of, you know, a very sort of mainstream populist star actress whose public image, if you like, has been one of, you could argue, of sort of a sexploitation and exploitation within her profile. And so there was a kind of, you know, a real kind of superimposing of real life with fiction, with real life. And so it felt like that this was quite a sort of, you know, potentially a very rich, very thought-provoking and very sort of, I don't know, potent exploration of a woman, professional woman in showbiz entering the sort of twilight years of her career. And it's all of those things. But Pamela Anderson, let's just pause on Pamela for a moment. You've had your encounter with her. I had a less intimate encounter with her, but what is your sense of Pamela before seeing this film? Baywatch and all that. I wasn't into Baywatch, so I don't really remember her from that.
You don't remember it from Baywatch?
Well, I mean, of course I remember her running with the red suit, but I never watched Baywatch.
Famous, wasn't she? Just so unbelievably famous, beautiful, absolutely gorgeous, always.
I came to really know her for the worst reason, which was the whole sex tape with Tommy Lee Jones. Was that his name, Tommy Lee? And I remember that. I remember that being very exciting and very sort of viral, way before there was even viral was a thing. It wasn't like social media.
She got hepatitis C from him.
Did she? God,
yeah.
I mean, that was just.
When I think of her, I think, because of course there was all the Baywatch thing, and we just everybody just sort of dismissed her as a dolly bird. But I think she's had an incredibly difficult life alongside being almost like an old-fashioned starlet sort of life. A lot of men have taken advantage of her in different ways, right from a young person. So I think there's a lot more to her than people thought, for sure.
I mean, I remember I was at the Cannes Film Festival, I think it was '95, and she was in Barbed Wire. Yeah. And that was a kind of, I can't remember that, I mean, it was a kind of action flick. I don't know if you remember, she had the, you know, the barbed wire tattoo.
Looked incredible.
Yeah, and I was in a press pack. We got a sort of moment with her when we were filming with her. I mean, she was stunningly beautiful, and she was like almost the quintessentially perfect American woman, wasn't she? Everything about her was
cartoon-like.
Kind of, cartoon-like, exactly. It also stars Jamie Lee Curtis, Billie Lourd, Dave Bautista, who we'd all know probably best for Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy.
Loved him in Guardians.
Yeah, and those are your sort of three top names, top characters. It's a very short film. As soon as the film started, I was really enjoying myself because I was really getting off on the way in which this film was shot. I thought there was a grain and a sort of filth.
Almost like a Super 8.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, there was a kind of almost smearing of the lenses at the edges, anamorphic lenses. It was very, almost dirty. It was almost difficult. Sometimes it looked a bit soft, which means out of focus. And there was a bit of a struggle, and I really liked that. I thought that gave it a certain kind of visceral, gritty, not documentary, but it gave it something else. It made it sort of almost mystical as well in its grubbiness, and almost a bit sort of fantastical in a way. So right at the beginning, I was really getting off on just the style of the film, and then she sort of very much comes into the film, and we're sort of on very long lens. The opening scene in this film is beautifully shot and beautifully edited. It's when I say a long lens, that doesn't mean you're far. It means you're literally very close up on a lot of very fast-moving activities, which is a very clever decision directorially, because you've essentially got a sort of a dressing room with a load of revue girls getting dressed. There's boobs, there's buttocks, there's lots of chat and all that kind of stuff.
Lots of feathers.
Lots of feathers, absolutely. Nipple tassels, all that kind of stuff. Though there weren't many nipple tassels. And just the way Gia Coppola covered that scene, I thought was really sensational.
It was so fabulously female.
Yeah, it sort of tumbled you into the story, didn't it?
Intimate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, that is the thing all the way through the film. You see more of that than you see of any show. You You only see snippets of the show.
And really right at the end.
But you get everything of the women in that tight dressing room.
Yeah.
I loved all those bits.
Yeah,
I loved it.
and you've got a sense of a sort of a company. It's kind of established that she's one of the longest serving members of the revue dance group. It's a kind of, is it Le Cage Folle? Is that what it's called?
Cage Folle.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's definitely the oldest, and there's lots of the younger ones looking after her and her mummying the younger ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I'd known when I went into it that it was shot in 18 days.
Right. Why?
Because I keep thinking about it, and I keep thinking, but is this wrong? Because the more I think about this film, the more I think, oh, probably if I'd known it was only shot in 18 days, but that's not right, should it?
No,
I would
not
have
at all.
given more things about it.
No, not at all.
No, because I think that it's okay to have different kinds of films.
Yeah.
And a film that's shot in 18 days is going to have different things right and wrong with it than something that you've spent 3 years over. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. As a filmmaker,
It's changed how I feel about it.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, as a filmmaker, I don't think any of those. That's when I don't think the details of production should get in the way of a film. I don't think you should watch it and go, "Oh, this is a good film for a film that was shot in 18 days."
I don't, but I can't help but change my mind since I.
So, what, more favourably towards it?
Much more favourably.
Oh, okay. It's set within Las Vegas. She's in a review show. You know, it's past its glory days. You get a real sense. Very cleverly, it's all talked about. It's all very much backstage. You've got a sense there's a diminishing audience.
Loved
I like
it.
that because
all that faded sort of glory,
Yeah.
and the costumes are fantastic.
Yeah.
And there's rails and rails of it, and you think, and that's how you see what it used to be. You know, and it's a big theatre, and I love
and a nice
the energy.
choice. A nice choice to go for both the muted colours, the grain, the car lots, the parking lots, for kind of a lot of their kind of cutaways of them having breaks. I very much feel, you know, Vegas can often be presented, it's often presented as quite an evil, malevolent, dark, twisted place you can get lost in. But often directors, filmmakers still exploit the glamour and the neon to get there. You know, I'm thinking of gangster films and all that kind of stuff. This film did a really good job of completely neutering the kind of the glitz and the glam. It was it was shabby.
The sort of the brightness of Vegas.
Yeah, and I like that.
The lights weren't on kind of thing.
Yeah, I really like that. So stylistically, loved this film actually throughout. I thought stylistically, technically, directorially, really, really nice. And at the beginning, I was really enjoying Pamela Anderson's performance, but then something started to kind of sag a bit for me. I don't know if you found that, and I couldn't work out what it was.
Did. When I first came out of the film, I was a bit irritated by it because I said to you tonight, I said, it's almost like it's blankets stitched together, and you buy into that at the beginning, but then it's like a patchwork. It's like there was something, and I didn't know whether it was the screenplay, was it the actual writing of it, was it the script? Pamela's baby voice, for me, is what I just didn't feel like she had the range, because it's okay to talk like that. And we had moments where she was deep, and it was fantastic, but a lot of it was just. But then again, you know, I think what I judged her for when I first came out, because I was really excited about it. I think maybe I built it up too much in my head what I was going to get, but I think maybe. On reflection, I think I was a bit harsh on her, because I think the shallowness I felt in her performance was the shallowness of her character.
Yes.
Because her character wasn't very bright. Her character was obsessed, let's face it, with fame.
Yes.
And so the contradiction of the sweet baby voice and actually being so lovely every time she saw her daughter. Oh, you're here. Oh, it's so wonderful. And you thought, oh, he's this sweet person. But actually, she was a very, very shallow, selfish, self-obsessed person. And when she doesn't let the young dancer come in halfway through the film, who's absolutely desperate, since thinking about the film, I thought, actually, she was really fucking nasty when she did that.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, really. I mean, I went into this film because I know I'm only saying this because you keep referring to the 18 days thing. But no, I mean, I went in knowing this was a low-budget indie film. I mean, even though it's got quite big stars in it, I knew it was a very tightly made and a very low-key kind of almost shot on the hoof, shot from the hip type thing. So I knew it was going to be kind of earthy. I knew it was going to be a bit unfinished at the edges. I don't mind, and that was fine. So I was going to forgive it that. I think the problem I had with her quite early on was was a sort of, and I don't mean this horribly, but there was a stupidity to her that was quite authentic potentially for some, you know. And I found that the younger women in the dance troupe had a sort of realism about the world. And she was very much, you know, they were looking at auditioning for new things, they were talking about this. I mean, obviously they were helped by the fact that they were all younger. And I think what was interesting was she was at that point in her life. I think what was interesting about her character and where we find her, and obviously the whole film is about essentially Dave Bautista, who's the kind of compere and director and lights guy who kind of sort of looks after the show, tells them all, stage manager, that the show's coming to an end. You see it in the trailer, and they've got 2 weeks to go. And of course, you know, we enter the slipstream of a woman who's 57, thinking, what the fuck else am I if I'm not this? What else have I got?
Because you've not paid attention to anything else.
And I thought what was interesting was, even though she was about to go off the edge of a cliff, who she was couldn't shift or pivot. And I thought that was quite an interesting thing, because you often get films where a character will pivot in some way. I thought she was going to pivot towards a romance again with Dave Bautista's character and just latch onto a relationship.
But actually she ended up being very horrible to him.
Yes.
And the more I think about it, the more I think that actually it was cleverer than I thought it was initially, because this sweet baby doll voice that was irritating, because I thought, what else have you got? Was actually there, the different, but we just found it hard to accept that actually she was horrible, because she was so sweet and she was so innocent. She was talking about her love of the feathers and her love of the lights, and what would she do without it? Actually, she was a fucking narcissist.
Yeah, and when you look at her smiling at the end in the final sort of sequence of the final show, it's about her. It's still about her. She's kind of indignant about the idea that it should be, you know, it should be her. And it's interesting you say that, because also there's a scene in the film, she has a daughter who she's estranged from. And I won't, there's a kind of reveal about who the father of that daughter is. But so she reconnects with her daughter at one point, and I thought there was a really brilliantly awkward scene where her daughter was telling her about going to college, being an artist and a photographer. Her mum, Pamela, was standing there having a drink and gave her nothing, could give her nothing. What Pamela Anderson's character in this film does all the way through it, you hit the buffers of what she's capable of all the time.
But I think we misunderstood that as well. I took that for a shallow performance, but she was a shallow character. But because she was dressed up sweet, pretty, innocent, it was confusing.
I think it was that, but I also genuinely think as well, there was a limit to what Pamela Anderson could achieve.
The other actress, there was a lack of training, there was a lack of talent. There was a lack of talent at the end of the day. She's not a great actress.
No.
And you feel that often. But you've got great moments. I think she must have been well directed. The thing is with her, this might be strange, viewer or listener. I likened some of what she was doing to the same problem I have with Renée Zellweger in Bridget Jones. This kind of like really mannered.
Nervous energy.
It's kind of like almost sweeping the end of the scene away.
Yes.
It was so rushed, and that's where I think actually the direction could have been better. Because if I'd been directing her, I would have said, just slow it down a bit here. It was almost like she had in her head, we've only got 18 days to do this.
And yet at the same time, it's actually a very uneventful film. I mean, I would argue that this was almost a short film that was built out into a longer film. There's not much to it, and there's not much sort of happens. Where I thought she was at her strongest was where she was off script, not having to, deliver lines. And we were just able to look at her. I found this whole film incredibly watchable. Interestingly, in those weird moments where they'd be waiting and having a cigarette break in a parking lot and all this kind of stuff, I found the non-dialogue sequences in this film really captivating, really thought-provoking. I found her weirdly more poignant and more engaging and interesting to watch when she wasn't delivering lines and scenes. And there was a scene where she was sat around the table at one point, and it was all the moment I could see, even in the way that Gia Coppola decided to edit the scene, she was exploiting longer responses and longer quiet times from Pamela. And in a weird way, I'm not saying that only when she wasn't talking was she good, but I got a bit bored of her staying at this one level all the way through. I couldn't.
That voice was irritating. But we must,
that's that dog, by the way.
We must pay homage to Jamie Lee Curtis, who, I'm sorry, just all the way through it, I wanted to know more and more about her character. She's the aging, further along character to Pamela Anderson's character. who is now just working with tables
waitress,
and getting her arse felt. And so if Pamela's 57, she was probably early 60s, right? And oh my God, it's the most unvain performance you've ever seen. Jamie Lee Curtis looks horrendous. And we know how she's done that thick orange pancake makeup with iridescent lipstick.
Shot from below a lot.
Shot from below. She obviously said to the director, go for it, just make me look total shit. And she is fantastic in it. She's loud, she's garish, she's abusive, she doesn't give a shit what she says to anyone. She's tough, she's been around the block, she's bitter because she can't dance anymore and she can't. And then there is a scene which is, I think, will just become an absolute iconic scene where she's dancing.
I mean, I thought she was tragic, and I thought she played tragedy really beautifully, right down to even with all her sort of brouhaha about what she is and how she's living her life and her opinions on everyone else around her, how she then ends up sleeping in her car and she has to come round and she's begging for...
She's a wounded person covering up anger and rage and bitterness.
And the one scene, there's a Jamie Lee Curtis moment where she climbs onto a podium. It's incredibly unglamorous. It's, you know, you could potentially say it was difficult to watch as a man. I mean, it was challenging because she didn't, none of what she was too old. You felt she was too old for doing what, no one is too old to do this, by the way. But this is in the middle of a casino or in the middle of a bar. She gets on a podium, she dances to a tune, incredibly gyratory and sexual. I mean, I was thinking back to the days when she was in that film, was it Flashdance, whatever it was, with John Travolta, and she was doing all the kind of movements. And it was one of the most challenging proto-feminist moments where you were forced to look at a woman who was of a certain age and look at her sexually, and she was in the zone and she was loving herself as well.
I think that's perfectly because she was in the zone, because though this is outrageous, you're standing on a table and you're not young anymore. But what you got from that was that she did not take into account a single other person. She was dancing totally for herself. She stepped out of the life that her life had become, and she stepped back into a place. What does it say? Dance like nobody's watching, or dance like everybody's watching.
But for me, it was like a short film.
Yeah,
that in itself, on its own, one sequence on its own.
I think it was it was a whole feminist story, just that dance.
It ricocheted the complications of getting old, being sexual, being a woman. Caring, not caring, the gaze, the male gaze, as a male viewer. And in a weird way, I suppose, all of the things at that moment, weirdly, with Jamie Lee Curtis, it was making you think about and engage with, were all the things that we've engaged with the image of Pamela Anderson throughout her career. So there were real crossovers in thematics and all that kind of stuff. So there are some great moments in this, but again, I would put that moment in that category of the non-verbal, non-dialogue, impressionistic sense of women. And what's interesting, given that, you know, we just had a Nora win the Best Picture and Best Director, and I was saying about Sean Baker, the director, that he's interested in the ignored sections of society, those people who work in certain, like sex work and stuff like that don't get looked at and are judged. I thought this was a really good film about women of a certain age. What happens to women of a certain age whose lives have been committed to, if not sex work, but then they've lived through their bodies? What happens? And then in a city like Vegas.
Horrific.
So it's quite depressing.
You're then down to having your arse felt up by drunken creeps as you take your tips. That's the story, anyway, that we're given.
Which is why Dave Bautista was such a breath of fresh air, because Dave Bautista in this, I thought, threw in an absolutely sensationally sensitive, interesting performance. I mean, he was a kind of complex, approachable, warm, but also limited in his own, massively limited in his own ways. Man who I was kind of almost willing them to get together.
But that is what we always want. We always want the woman to be saved by the man, don't we? So when you find out whether they do or not, but it's something we have to try and fight against whenever we're watching a story like that, don't we? Oh, wouldn't this be nice if this man now just swept her off her feet and it would all be sorted out?
And there's no neat conclusion to this. What this film does is it's quite literally a slice in this woman's life, because of course we end with probably the most razzle-dazzle moment of the film.
This is her life over a period of a week.
Yeah, essentially. And we see the razzle-dazzle performance towards the end of the film. You see what her life has been all about. And there was a really tragic moment where she was asking her daughter if she'd seen the show and what did she think of the show, and she was searching for some affirmation from her daughter and adoration
from her daughter that she hadn't given the same adoration to.
And I hadn't thought about that. You know, that moment where she does essentially tell one of the other dancers who's having a bad time, just shuts the door.
What woman could do that to another woman?
What a selfish selfish woman.
And they say to her in the next scene, we've looked after, no, I'm not going to do anything for you, because they're looking after her. They're holding her up all the way through the show, sorting out her costumes, getting her up the stairs. A young girl that was the same age as her daughter, comes to the door, desperate. Beautiful performance by that actress.
Yeah, she was great.
There's only a few lines, but it was a beautiful performance. And she slams the door in her face. As a mum, it's just beyond my understanding.
I think it would just turn someone
Now,
away.
people have all sorts of terrible situations that they have to fight through, but to just completely turn away, you've got to be some kind of person to do that.
Yeah. Lots of cringe moments in this film.
I didn't realise what a cow she was. When I was watching it, I didn't realise what a cow this character is.
Right. And does that make you appreciate the film more?
Yeah.
It does.
Maybe it makes me appreciate her performance more. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sure how much of a cow they wanted us to think.
Yeah.
Whether how much of
maybe
that we're
nobody
bringing
else in
to
the
it.
whole world will think she's a cow.
I mean, I think there's no surprise that she hasn't actually, been nominated as often as everyone was kind of claiming she should be nominated. It's clearly a massive course correct for Pamela Anderson, the actress.
You can't be rewarded for just doing something different than you normally do.
And also the first time. And I think I felt, as you rightly said, the limits of her ability to kind of deliver on that. I felt that the filmmaking was doing a lot of the heavy lifting in its impressionistic sense of a woman on her own. The details that you've thrown up, I think, around her selfishness are interesting. But again, I wonder how much of that was conscious. All in all, though, was it the film you were expecting to see? Would you recommend to your judgment is, would you recommend friends to see it or not? If I'm honest, I was slightly disappointed and underwhelmed by her.
Yeah, I think that's a good word. I was underwhelmed, but I don't quite know what I was. I mean, I do like the story of the faded showgirl, so I suppose that was it. I would say to go to see it, actually. To friends that like film and friends that are very, Jamie Lee Curtis, it's only a short film.
It's incredibly short.
So I would say to people, go and see it, but with reservations, and I'd love to know what you thought of Pamela Anderson. That's how I'm going, oh my God, you have to see it.
Dare I ask, did it, given that you are, for want of a better expression, in show business yourself, did it speak to the faded, sort of fame?
People trying to hang on. I'm just so glad that I was never somebody that was like, nothing that I've ever done has been about the way I look. I've never been like held up as glamorous or beautiful or anything like that. Because I think that's so hard to let go of, isn't it? It's just, I see it sometimes with older people just not wanting to let go. And then they just keep putting on the same makeup and wanting and being the same sort of, and I just don't think there's anything sadder than somebody just clinging on.
Yeah, but what I thought was really nice, just finally on it, and I found it very believable, was that she didn't have an epiphany. There was no epiphany moment. There was no sudden route out. There was no sudden change of plan.
Because life isn't like
No,
that.
exactly. She was inexorably heading towards an end that we are left after the film thinking, well, what the fuck does happen? What, she hasn't got, they talk, she hasn't got a pension, she hasn't got this, she's not in a
Well, the
relationship.
horror. When Jamie Lee Curtis says to her, you'll be coming with me. I think what I think will happen to her in the end is that she ends up with Jamie Lee Curtis in that very same bar and this whole side.
I think so too. Yeah, you're right. I didn't find it particularly likeable. I had a couple of moments where I wanted to protect her and look after her. Isn't that terrible? The audition scene I found excruciating to watch when she was rejected by the guy and he says the line,
That's life.
Well, and again, you just sort of think how much of that, mind you, when he was delivering those lines, I really wanted to be on her at the moment that he delivered the lines that you were once sexy and you were once this. I know we cut back to it and I know it's not a documentary, but I really wanted to be seeing her as I heard those lines.
Odd choice.
Yeah, odd choice. It wasn't quite what I was expecting. It was enjoyable enough and it was a relief it was short.
Do you think we were affected by the hype?
Yeah, I think it is a film that's been hyped.
Because when you hear things like, oh, she's going to be nominated, you think, wow, she's going to give a sensational performance. Yeah. And what she gave was an adequate performance.
Yes, totally adequate.
And maybe if we hadn't heard anything about it, we see this indie film with what's her name in it, from Thingamajig.
I agree.
We probably would have gone, oh, that's a good shame, isn't it? When you think she was in Baywatch and
I agree.
she was sort of hoisted by her own petard.
If I was to score it, and I like to score these things, I'd give it 50 out of 100. And Nadia,
and the way I score is to say whether I would say go and see it or not. And as I said, I would say go and see it just because I want to know what you think of Pamela. Oh, but see it because Jamie Lee, it's worth seeing for Jamie Lee Curtis because it's quite a short film, so you won't get bored. But yeah, maybe take a glass of wine in with you.
There you go.